Hello and welcome. I'm Johnny and this is Live. Today we'll be doing a magnetic carousel. Again, one of my most popular videos is about making a magnetic carousel using Tailwind and Svelte. And it's been requested that I try to do one with React as well. So I hope that's of interest to you. It should be, because I put out a poll where I've given a few options and the option to submit your own subject, suggest anything you'd like, and maybe on these Friday streams we're gonna do it. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Not the actual carousel, but this huge version of my face. That's the video where we initially did the magnetic carousel with Tailwind 3. Tailwind 3 was brand new back then. And Svelte, I chose Svelte, and I choose Svelte for these types of things that are mostly HTML and CSS tricks, because I find Svelte is closer to vanilla HTML and CSS. So if you do want to adapt to something else like React or Vue or anything else, then it should be easier if you start from the Svelte code that I saw here. Nevertheless, people did request, and shout out to Ray in particular, that there was the need to do this in React. Please tell me, Johnny, how to do this in React. And I commented a few months ago that, oh, if I only was set up to live stream, I would do a nice little cheeky live stream to show how it works, how it would work in React. So today, now that I'm set up here in lovely Barcelona with the sun out and the birds chirping, we're gonna try to do it live. I will not really have this video playing for me, sadly. So you're in an advantage with this, that you have me going play by play. Here's what we're doing, no frills. And I'd say that this is a banger of a video. This is actually one of the really good ones. I'm proud of this one, having watched it again before this stream. It's giving me a bit of imposter syndrome, to be honest. Imposter syndrome for myself, because due to the magic of preparation, it looks like I'm flying through the magic of editing, as well, as I always say. So today this stream is going to be the imposter syndrome cure. Let's see how we'll be able to do it, not from the ground up. We've done this before, but that's what engineering is all about. You keep doing things again and again, they start making more sense, they just start becoming more intuitive. I guess nothing starts as intuitive, no matter what they tell you about Svelte even, or any other framework. Nothing on the web is intuitive. In any case, we will be using Tailwind again, and even there they have a few examples of how this works. You could use this as inspiration as well. And of course, the original video I made has a link to the project where you could even lift some code for yourself. And today's output will indeed be some code committed somewhere for you to click and find and implement a bit faster maybe. But do try to understand what we're going for here. I think I've improved my OBS setup. I think there should be some music playing, and still I should be audible, and I should be able to see the chat. So please let me know what you'd like to see from me. If anything's looking weird, please ask. A bonus in this video, not only are we gonna do it in a different UI framework in React, I'm also gonna show a bit of Cypress, so a bit of BDD, a bit of end-to-end testing here. I may brave that. I haven't set up much. I've set up a Next.js project, but that's about it. I have this implement here, placeholder, and this is the code we'll be working with. And I also have a very bare bones Cypress test, which just checks for the header, and we can start our implementation by looking for the first image. Another thing I prepared, which is the same as the video, is this list of images. So I've got these places, these images I've taken from some of the places I've worked from the past couple of years, and I'll be reusing it again today. So for the Cypress test in home spec, it could be that in order to have a failing test, We want to find by role again, but we want to find an image, and we want the name of that image to be London. Good old London. Believe it or not, the place where I've had my best summer ever. Even though, and I live in Barcelona, even though I'm from Greece. So this looks like a failing test to me because we've got no images. I won't be too cheeky with hard coding the answers and just writing like a single image or whatever here. So I will. This is React. So one of the classic things in any front-end development is looping through arrays of items. If you can loop through arrays and do conditionals, you can make any web app. You'll be a prime engineer, I promise you that. So the way we do that with React, it may look a bit weirder than in other frameworks, but for example, I find that it looks more natural than Svelte in this instance. We have the array of images and we want to map the objects that we have that have a title and source each in this array of images into some JSX, let's say, some HTML looking things. So we want to map them all. I was going to say divs, but maybe list items makes more sense. In which case, we'd want to put this inside an unordered list. So we want list items. React will work better if we give a unique key for these, and we can attempt to do the title as the key. This should be unique. If you give something like the index of the array item, that won't help React at all because it helps when React has to do things like reorder stuff. If you are just telling it's going to be the second item in the array and you reorder the array, then it's not going to help it any because the ordering has changed and you keep saying the same thing. If you say that, oh, the thing that was called London, which was first, now it's at the end, you have to render it last, then it will do something more efficient. So never use index, the indices for keys, use something unique. In this case, title should be unique enough. And we want that list item inside it. We want an image, of course, and the image will have a source that we can also destructure from each individual image. And we can give the image title as well. And that renders things in the page. And if we run this, this should work if I did it correctly. Did I do the expectation correctly? Yes, it's correct. We have an underline here because I have scaffolded this using Next.js. We are able to use next image, which does some magic to ensure that our images as let's say easy to download, easy on the browser as possible. So in order to use Next.js events, we import it. And I believe the suggestion is that we should be specifying width and height in order for it to be able to do its job a bit better. And I know that all of these images have a 300, 400 width and height. And it's also saying, let's give it an alt, even though it has a title, arguable. So now we're using the super efficient next image. This, if you have larger images according to the viewport that the user is in, it will get the highest resolution possible image there. So if you have a small screen with non-retina display, it will get a tiny image. If you have a liquid crystal display, I don't know, I'm just making up keywords. If you have a super high resolution, then it will actually draw from the original picture there. You can also do cool things like blur hashing. This is the thing that Medium made popular, the blogging platform that I do not use anymore, which is you see the image as a bit of a blurry thing because they actually create a blur hash that corresponds to am I being like too nerdy here? Probably. Let's get on to doing the carousel stuff. So What we're doing here is we have all the images, but that's not good enough. We want this to be in a nice carousel that you can scroll past. And for that, in the container, so the unordered list, oops, I'm doing a bit of Svelte, so class goes there, but React wants class name. If we make this a flex container, you can see it will actually nicely contain everything inside the screen horizontally, but that's too small. In order to ensure that the images keep their intended width, we can specify that they should shrink 0. So how much should they shrink? 0, not at all. And that should make this kinda work a bit better. But we can see that the overflow is getting crazy. So on a non-mobile device, maybe this looks a bit better, but still broken for the ones that are willing to scroll around and see the rest of the images. And especially on mobile, it looks just horrible because it's trying to fit everything on the screen and it just gets nasty. So that's not what we want. And the easy way to fix that is to say that the container, anything that overflows on the x-axis, you should hide it, which I believe is overflow x hidden. So this will crop it at all, will crop it and you won't be able to see anything else at all. However, if you do auto, it will know to not really hide it, but allow scrollability, vertical scrollability. So if we go there, you can see that we can actually scroll around. So kind of like a carousel, but not quite what we want. And that's because we want a magnetic carousel, not just any carousel. We want a cool looking carousel. However, let's add some space in between, some pleasing space in between the pictures. And again, on our container, we can say something like gap 6, which will ensure each one has 6. Well, a gap of 1.5 rem. Let's say this is a Tailwind class that corresponds to that. I have the plugin that lets me know what exactly we're doing here. In any case, this looks about done. It's not broken anymore on mobile. And what we want to do next is make it magnetic. So if I stop scrolling in this position, that's not that pleasing to the eye. I would rather it either centers, it always centers at least one image, I suppose. That's the magnetic part of the functionality. And we can use that with a relatively new scroll CSS utilities. And with Tailwind, what we need is to add a few more things in the container and a few more things in the list items themselves. So what we actually need is to make it magnetic. It doesn't have magnetic in the name, it has snap because it snaps into position, I guess. So we want to snap X on the x-axis, and we want to snap mandatory, so to always snap somewhere. And in order for that to be anchored somewhere, we need to also specify something in the list item. And we want to say we want to snap in the center. So with that done, and if I focus there, you can see that no matter where I try to scroll, it will end up on the center of an image. Even if I try to do this, it will go to the one that's more visible, I suppose, which is pretty cool. However, you may have noticed that effect is not achieved on the very first image because there isn't enough padding. And a way to work around that is to use a before pseudo element that has like some space, enough for it to actually allow even the very first image to be centered. So the way you use pseudo elements with Tailwind, you prefix with before and then add whatever you want to add there. So we want them to not be shrinking. because that minimize process would happen for them as well. But we also want the before pseudo element to be of some width. And I think if we do like 4/5, 80% of the screen, maybe that would be good enough to make it be centerable. It adds this annoying like scroll bar gap to start with, but I think that's the best solution I could think of. And it should work well enough for most screen sizes. So what is centered even when it comes to having such a huge screen. But feel free to play around with how much width you want the before pseudo element to actually have for this effect to be achieved. And you can also always add a few more breakpoints. So on the mobile viewport, maybe it's 4/5, maybe it's a bit less, or maybe a bit more in different viewports. Feel free to play around. And if we were workshopping together, I would ask, like, now that you have this information, how do we make the same happen for the last ones? This is intentional silence for you to slightly think about. The answer is that we want an after pseudo element. You have before and after pseudo elements. And we can copy exactly what we added for the before pseudo elements, prefix with after instead, and we'll do the same trick in that at the end of the magnetic carousel, it will add like some fake gap, some fade width, just to allow that final image to be centered. So at this point, magnetic carousel kinda achieved, but you may want to add things like click to go to the next page, or have like anchors for everything possible. Maybe you don't want people to actually scroll through things to figure out what you have in the carousel. So let's also make some nav items. And probably at this point, let's extract this into its own component. Let's create a magnetic carousel. .tsx. It's going to be a functional component, and I have this shortcut for us. The props is going to be images, which is going to be an array of something. And let's say that an image item has a source and it has a title. Indeed, GitHub Copilot carrying most of the time. So this thing takes us some images as props. This thing is called the magnetic carousel, or maybe we can call it just a carousel. Maybe not. And what we want is to steal all of this. There are some refactoring options, but I do think in this case, a good old cut and paste should be enough. So this gets fed the images as props. This is going to be the component that actually uses Next.js, next image. And now our home component will be rendering a magnetic carousel and feeding it the hard-coded images we have up here. And doing this allows us to more easily have multiple carousels in the page. We'll come back to that idea in just a bit. For now, let's add that navbar we were talking about. So, carousel looks fine. Our problem is, let's see what's actually in that carousel without having to scroll past and have some anchors there. And maybe this is a good time to update the tests. Let's say that I want to find by role, I want a link this time that's called London, which doesn't exist. It will search for a little bit and find nothing. And To resolve that, we can add this component in fragments and say that we have a nav section now. And once again, for each of the images, we're going to do something. This time we'll have an anchor to nowhere with the title of the image. We won't be using the source here, which I believe should make the tests pass. But it doesn't, very rightly, because this is not a valid link. It needs an href place to go. And in this case, we don't want to go into a different page, which is what we usually do with anchors. We want to go to another place in the same page. We want to go to another element with a specific ID. And for that, we prefix with the pound sign, the hashtag sign nowadays, and then put the element name. So we want to go to the element that has this title. So for that to be possible, we also want each list item to have an ID. And we can make this ID just be the title. And hopefully that will work. Ah, the keys. They got us again. So let's see, did I make this up? No, I was telling the truth. And this fixed things. So the tests are now happy, even though this doesn't look too great. So maybe let's make a flex call for this. This navbar, maybe add some margin bottom here, not too much margin. And indeed, if we do click on those links, it goes to the place that we want. Not too shabby. Let's make these a bit bigger. Not that big. Hopefully big enough. That should be all right. All right. So at this point, we do have IDs with just the title. And even though we don't really use that many IDs in most apps nowadays, because you usually get references to individual HTML elements through different ways. So you get a React to grab a reference. You use ref for the React hook to get a reference to something. So we don't litter the page with things with too many IDs here, but to make that more guaranteed unique, because you should have a unique identifier as the ID of an element, we can also have our carousel taking a name. It's going to be a string. And we can prefix that to the ID here. So let's create a utility method with item ID. And then we probably want indeed the index at some point. It's going to be a number. And then the carousel name, let's say, the name of the carousel. It's going to be a string. And then this will return carousel name, das item, that's the index of the item that fills. All right. In this case, this will always be unique, and we're not actually using it for the keeper up there, so it shouldn't be a problem if we ever reorder things. If we reorder the images, the navbar should change, the navigation should change, and also the order in the carousel should change. So it should all change the same way. So let's use the item ID here, the get item ID method here, pass it the name and the index, which we can get as the second argument in the fat arrow method in map. Index. And that should give it unique IDs. And in the href, we still need to prefix this with the pound hashtag sign in order to signify that we want to hit the item that has an ID of whatever we put here. Index again is what we're missing. And this should work the same. And everything is beautiful. But this is not awesome enough. This is not cool enough, as I say in the other video, because indeed, this is a bit abrupt. It just isn't cool. You want to go there with smooth scrolling, like smoothly go to wherever you click. This is part of the point why we're making this like a magnetic carousel. We want the experience of moving to different images to be cool. So how do we do that with the navigation? In the video, I did it by writing a JavaScript method, or TypeScript method if you want to call it that. So I did it JS way. The browser definitely executes JavaScript, so I did it with JS in the end. But there is a way to do it with CSS as well. There's a way to do it with Tailwind. Let's try that one this time. You may need to resort to the other method if you want to do things like have big arrows that go to the next item or the previous item, or if you press your right arrow on the keyboard to go to the next item or something like that. If you want to do key bindings, you'd want to do it with JavaScript, you'd have to do it with JavaScript. But we can do it now in our use case where we don't have such buttons by applying something again to the container of the things we're scrolling to. So the list items we're scrolling to, the container once again is the unordered list. And what we want to add is scroll smooth. And if I click now, you can see that we are indeed smooth scrolling, which is pretty sweet. However, this is a case of, even though the animation isn't that fast, you may want to be considerate if someone has selected to reduce motion. We can eliminate motion, and Tailwind does have a class for that as well. There is the utility class that works like before, after, SM, all of those things. There is a motion safe class. You can prefix it to anything, and then that will be applied whenever the user has not selected that they prefer reduced motion, as you can see here from my editor hint. So if we do that, we can still see the scrolling is smooth as we want. But if I go down in the emulator that you can't really see due to my face, so I'll try to remove my face for just a moment. Bring in the command palette here with the command Shift P and find the emulate CSS prefer reduce motion technique. And now you'll see that we instantly go to the item, because I've said I prefer reduce motion and we are only smooth scrolling when it's motion safe. So I'll go back to my emulator and to not emulate this, and we're back. So it's always nice to be considerate to people's preferences. It's always better for accessibility. More accessibility may mean more users, definitely means more happy users. So try your best to get there. Cool. We've done the smooth scrolling. We've done the navigation. At the video at this point, I extract this into a separate component just to show that we don't need this to be built into the carousel. But I think more important will be to actually use a custom component here. So instead of always using this, How would we be able to pass a custom component? So let's say we have different types of images here. Maybe you have like horizontal and vertical images. Maybe you have articles that are drafts. Maybe you have articles that aren't published yet. So you don't want a call to action or you want something else. Let's pretend that this array of images is actually an array of items that needs some different visuals. So first, let's extract. I will try this part and not the actual list item here into its own component. So let's call this in components. Let's create a new component. Call it review card. ESX, functional component. And what is it going to take? I guess it is going to take a title. It is going to take a source. And maybe that's it. That's the image properties again. I guess so. For now, at least that's the case. And I need to call this review card. I want to call this review card. And from the Magnetic Carousel component, I can copy wholesale what we got here, which is the image, Next.js image. Once again, we'll need to change where we import this. And destructure the source and the title. But let's put this inside another container once again and use our review card for now. And we need to pass title and source. So this should look the same, but we can start styling this. Maybe give this a relative. Because I wish to have a floating button here with the title. And this, I want to give it an absolute position. Maybe bottom 0 and left 0. And give it some padding. Give it a background of primary. Primary 400. Not too shabby. 300. And rounded corners, of course. Maybe the bottom is gonna be 4. The left is gonna be 2. Give it a shadow. And let's say this actually says read more about London. So each one of these has this little action button that doesn't really do anything, but that's not the point of the video. Hey Alvaro, how are you doing? I have the chat visible, but I can't see it all, which is a bit of a shame. Keep typing and I will be able to see it. All right, this is much better. Hey there, could have read the whole message. So we have these buttons now. They have a bit of a shadow. And what we're saying is that, let's say we have an item that's like an upcoming or a coming review. So we want to begin with a different looking card. So we're calling these cards, aren't we? And I think officially cards should have rounded corners and a shadow. So maybe this makes it a bit better. Maybe not, we'll see. Of course, we need to apply this to the actual image. Oof, that may cause problems because I know that next image does apply quite a few. It applies a container, a div container above the image. Hey, Gant. And yeah, I think the component is looking nice at this point. Now that it has rounded corners, can't get any better than that. Cool. So we have this card, and let's say we want a slightly different card for the upcoming things that may be linking to something else, may not have a button. We'll see what happens. But in order for that, we cannot have in the magnetic carousel hard-coded that we want to use the review card. We want this to be dynamic. We want the review card to be dynamic. So let's go back home and try to think about how this would work. And let's say that this is the travel carousel, for example. We want to pass a component here, container, something like that. So if you really think about it, the props here are images, name, and component to use, which would be a React component type. This may work. Usually I go with functional component because I always use function components, but I do think this is a superset of everything, so it should work. Also, you could pass this as uppercase, and then you won't have to do any aliasing afterwards, but I often see that people prefer using lowercase for this. They also sometimes use element. So you may even pass a div that you don't want a component, you just want a div, for example. Up to you. Let's go for component at this point, and we're gonna use the component here and say, and get it out of the props, use it here. Yes, it is indeed the magnetic carousel with Svelte now in React, because I had quite a few comments that were asking of how is it going to be done. And I think this is the point where it's a bit different from Svelte. So instead of using Svelte component, we have to pass this as a component here in the props. So the component type will actually have these props, which we may export to use in different places. Maybe item component props makes a bit more sense. And then even the review card could say that its own props are item component props in the magnetic carousel, which may be a bit of a roundabout dependency. But hey, everything seems to be working out. Except, of course, the actual app, because back in home, we're not passing a component here. So in the magnetic carousel, let's pass the component and say that we want the component to be the review component. Review card, is that why? Yes. So we're back to working, but we're back to having the same item, the same type of item on everything, on every item in the carousel. So what we actually want to move to is that its image item should have its own component type. So the image item should have source and title, and then a component. Again, this could be like the image props as well. So maybe these could be the props here, an object like this. Which would mean that we get the component out of the images. and the title and source from the props. But now we need to go back home and map those images to image components, I suppose, or enhanced images. We'll see what we call them, but we definitely want to map through them. Each image we want to add here, we actually call it props. We want to map the image properties into props, so we could even just alias this to props and say that the component for all of these should be the review card. And if we wrap this to inline return, we can say that, maybe let's call this image items to make it a bit less confusing. Naming things, as we all know, is quite hard. So the image items, we'll call this image items 2, is this. Doesn't take a component. Oops, did I mean to set images here? It's items. Structure the title from the props. And we're back to these that are looking the same, but finally I'm gonna copy paste, duplicate the review card component and create an upcoming card component. And say that we're currently at title, and instead of the primary color, it's gonna use the secondary color. Be a bit deeper, maybe we'll have text white. And let's say that the first item of this array is the place that's not upcoming anymore, as I was saying in the video. It's the place that I'm currently in, Barcelona. So now it's not a picture from Unsplash, it's a picture from here, from right about here, vantage point. But we also want to say that the component for this one these are gonna be the props. And the component for this one is gonna be the upcoming card. If I remember to rename this card, then my editor will help. All right, let's see. Will it work? Guess not. Image items, it's not happy because of the uppercase problem. Cool. All right, here we are. I'm standing right here. And now we are using a different component for this particular item of the carousel, and everything else is still using the blue ones. So you can imagine that this actually goes to a review. Maybe this goes to take your email. Oh, you live in Barcelona too? That's amazing. I hope you're prepared for the weekend weather. Apparently it's gonna be 30 degrees. It's gonna be something fierce. But yeah, hopefully no geolocation information here. If you want to meet up, let me know. No need to try to find the metadata there. Cool. So custom components here, you can add any functionality you want into different components as you please. The last place we want to go to, maybe we couldn't go a bit more on the tests, but you let me know if you'd like to see a bit more on that. The last place is, what would we want to do if we want to extract the nav out of the component, out of the magnetic carousel? If we wanted this to be separate, the key problem, I guess, is that how do we know how to create this ID? How do we know our anchors will be referencing the correct carousel items if we have this like weird way to create the item ID? I will switch over to the face screen to just grab some water, let you think about that. Yeah, the heat is extreme. And again, I think I've built up some tolerance by virtue of growing up in an island in Greece. But if you're in an island in Greece, you always have water and shade, so it's a bit easier. And Barceloneta only makes me warmer because it's so packed. It's nuts, but beautiful. All right, we've covered quite a few things. Let's cover the separation of the navbar from the actual carousel, because that may be helpful for us. And yeah, the humidity is what gets you for sure. Cool, so we don't want the navbar here anymore. Easy enough to remove it. But how do we get it in here? It seems like it will just about work, but as we said, all we need is this item ID, get item ID method. So maybe we can just export it from this component, bring it in, and then ensure we're giving the same name that we gave the carousel. So let's extract this into a const. Let's call it travel carousel and pass travel carousel to here. So this still works, but if right after that we had another carousel named unscrollable, then this one wouldn't have a navbar, or maybe you'd want to combine those two navbars here. And of course, let's create a unscrollable images array here. Let's randomly keep, oh, Buenos Aires, done that. I think I've mentioned in the comments with you. And shake things up. Scrollable image items is this, and pass them to this carousel. So now further proof that we're using two carousels. This has a different component for a particular one because it's the upcoming one. And this one here, we only have navbar to scroll to control this carousel over here. And that's about it. This brings me to another point. Do you not want this to scroll to the top of this page, you can control this with a padding offset stuff you may have. So if you had some extra padding, some let's search for it. Scroll padding. Let's say that we can give this scroll padding top 6. Is it getting deeper? Are we going the wrong way? Maybe. Oh no! Ever since I got the second screen, I was so confident that I'll never do this mistake again. So here's the editor. Thanks for letting me know, and hello from Brisbane. So what did we probably do while I was not showing the editor? We didn't do too much, I think. In the home component, I just added this thing to show off that you can have multiple carousels with different images. So we have the image array, we're mapping through those images to create some image items and add the props from the images and a specific component for review card for all of them, but the first one we are using a custom component. We're using the upcoming card component just for that one. This is the pink one with the secondary color. Everything else has the cyan color. And the other thing I did since I stopped sharing my screen should be that I created this other array of unscrollable images which uses the same images, but let's pretend that they're different. And for that one, every single one is using the review card, and we've extracted the navbar to only have a navbar for the first ones here. And we could, I suppose, in the same nav section, have links for the unscrollable stuff. Sadly, they have the same thing. They have the same title, so it's a bit confusing. But if we pass the correct name here, you can see that these scroll the bottom carousel. Maybe a name for that would be nice. Pass it here. Maybe instead of having the nav breaking the two components, we can have it be like this. So things to scroll, more images, and then you have like a huge navbar that combines all of them, and you'll scroll the appropriate one. All right, smooth save, thanks for that. And maybe, just maybe, that's about it. And we can talk a little bit about how to test this. If we go back to the editor, I'm using Cypress here, and I've added a custom command that we may want to use. We may want to check whether something is in the viewport or not in the viewport. So if we say this is in viewport, the tests should pass again. Maybe not. Oof, it's because I have the two carousels. This is making things confusing. So let's very quickly pretend that we have no unscrollable images here, because we want to showcase something else. Cool, this looks better, I'm sure. So apparently Cypress doesn't have something to check whether something is in the viewport. It has a helper for us that is called is visible. You can check something should be visible or should not be visible, but that's if it's interactable. If it's in the DOM anywhere, so even if it's hidden and the user has to scroll to it, it will consider it visible. There is nothing to say is it in the DOM, but not actually visible with my eyeballs as a user. Not eventually visible. Is it currently visible? Is it on screen? For that, I've added a command based on things I found on the internet. A command is in viewport that checks the current document dimensions and sees if the current element is within those bounds. So if it's bottom, it's more than the end of the page, like that sort of thing. And a similar one, whether it's not in viewport, where any of the conditions of the is in bounds that I have here. So is the top of this item inside within the document? If any of these is not true, we consider it not visible. So if I say here in the home spec that the Christmas image is in the viewport, hopefully that's gonna say no, it's not. Let's see it fail live, which is true. But if I find the Christmas image, maybe keep that. If I find the anchor for the Christmas image and sorry, before we do that. So this shouldn't be in the viewport to start with. We want the screen area of the state. This is green. But then if I find the link, the anchor, and I click it, I would hope that this will be in the viewport. Haven't actually tried this. Let's see if it works. It kinda, it would work if it waited a little bit for the scrolling to stop, which is a bit unfortunate. This really made me laugh. So do we have like a delay function? Do we have a wait for this? Within 3 seconds. Let's Google it live. Cypress delay seconds or something. Wait. So let's wait. Hopefully that's not 500 minutes. And it does indeed pass. Have a second to wait, it's not too crazy. I'd say any animation should be less than 3.3 seconds. So it's a bit unfortunate that this doesn't work, but we literally go from the first one to the last one. So maybe that's fine. So we wait for this. We click, we wait a little bit for any possible animation. And then this actually becomes in the viewport. And just for the lols, we can check that the London image is not in the viewport anymore. And all of this is true. Is this worth testing? Maybe. It's a bit of a visual thing. It's definitely worth testing whether your links work and that sort of thing. So if you don't think it's too obnoxious, to have this setup, to have to write this custom command to check whether something is in the viewport, then be my guest, do it. But at the very least, I would have tests to check, are the images there? Are there links there? Can I click the links? Are things still visible as Cypress considers them visible, even though it's not humanly visible? I think that'd be good enough. And with that, this may be a show. So I will switch to the face, and if you're still there, even though it's after midnight, that's a commitment right there. Please let me know if we end up doing more code and I forget to switch my screen yet again. I will give everyone in the chat a few minutes to think of questions if you got them, and let me know. Else, we're gonna wrap up, and I'll see you on the next one. I'll try to be doing this every Friday. Maybe if you have a boss, if you have an easy Friday night, you can tune in. You can tell your boss, I'm gonna be spending learning time with Johnny. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. The cool thing with this overlay that has my face is that I did manage to set up the chat there on the right, and it looks like it's not that delayed. It seems like it does work. Hopefully the music I cannot hear, sadly, because I am streaming it to you guys. Hopefully it's been alright. Hopefully it hasn't been too loud. You could hear me, and it was some sweet beats. I do play them every so often. Like I either do that or zip tunes. EDM, maybe years and years ago, not today. Cool, I see the lull, so we're wrapping up and we're gonna end the stream. Thanks a bunch for tuning in. I hope anyone that wanted to do what we did in the other video, but in React, is now completely unstuck. Let me know if you have suggestions for improvements about this, and I will add a link to the comments to the project that I'm gonna commit and push, so you can have a better look at what exactly we did today. Thanks a bunch for watching. I'll see you around.